Chapter 12. The Bloody Square. The bodies would be dumped in the square at night so that everyone would see them the next morning on their way to work. There was usually a note pinned to them saying something like, "This is what happens to an army agent," or "Do not touch this body until 11 a.m. or you will be next." On some of the nights of the killings there would also be earthquakes, which made people even more scared as we connect every natural disaster with a human disaster. They killed Shabana on a bitterly cold night in January 2009. She lived in Banner Bazaar, a narrow street in our town of Mingora, which is famous for its dancers and musicians. Shabana's father said a group of men had knocked at her door and asked her to dance for them. She went to put on her dancing clothes, and when she returned to dance for them, they pulled out their guns and threatened to slit her throat. This happened after the 9 p.m. curfew and people heard her screaming, "I promise I'll stop. I promise I won't sing and dance again. Leave me, for God's sake. I am a woman, a Muslim. Don't kill me." Then shots rang out and her bullet-ridden body was dragged to Green Chowk. So many bodies had been left there that people started calling it the Bloody Square. We heard about Shabana's death the next morning. On Mullah FM, Fazlullah said she deserved to die for her immoral character and any other girls found performing in Banner Bazaar would be killed one by one. We used to be proud of our music and art in Swat, but now most of the dancers fled to Lahore or to Dubai. Musicians took out adverts in the papers saying they had stopped playing and were pledging to live pious lives to appease the Taliban. People used to talk about Shabana's bad character, but our men both wished to see her dance and also despised her because she was a dancer. A Khan's daughter can't marry a barber's son and a barber's daughter can't marry a Khan's son. We Pashtuns love shoes but don't love the cobbler, we love our scarves and blankets but do not respect the weaver. Manual workers made a great contribution to our society but received no recognition, and this is the reason so many of them joined the Taliban, to finally achieve status and power. So people loved to see Shabana dance but didn't respect her, and when she was murdered they said nothing. Some even agreed with her killing, out of fear of the Taliban or because they were in favor of them. Shabana was not a Muslim, they said. She was bad, and it was right that she was killed. I can't say that was the worst day. Around the time of Shabana's murder every day seemed like the worst day, every moment was the worst. The bad news was everywhere. This person's place bombed, this school blown up, public whippings. The stories were endless and overwhelming. A couple of weeks after Shabana's murder, a teacher in Mata was killed when he refused to pull his shalwar above the ankle the way the Taliban wore theirs. He told them that nowhere in Islam is this required. They hung him and then they shot his father. I couldn't understand what the Taliban were trying to do. They are abusing our religion, I said in interviews. How will you accept Islam if I put a gun to your head and say Islam is the true religion? If they want every person in the world to be Muslim, why don't they show themselves to be good? Muslims first. Regularly my father would come home shaken up due to the terrible things he had witnessed and heard about, such as policemen beheaded, their heads paraded through the town. Even those who had defended Fazlullah at the start, believing his men were the real standard bearers of Islam, and given him their gold, began to turn against him. My father told me about a woman who had donated generously to the Taliban while her husband was working abroad. When he came back and found out she had given away her gold, he was furious. One night there was a small explosion in their village and the wife cried. "Don't cry," said her husband. "That is the sound of your earrings and no studs. Now listen to the sound of your lockets and bangles." Yet still so few people spoke out. My father's old rival in college politics, Ihsan ul-Haq Haqqani, had become a journalist in Islamabad and organized a conference on the situation in Swat. None of the lawyers and academics he invited from Swat to speak turned up. Only my father and some journalists went. It seemed that people had decided the Taliban were here to stay, and they had better get along with them. When you are in the Taliban you have 100% life security, people would say. That's why they volunteered their young men. The Taliban would come to people's houses, demanding money to buy Kalashnikovs, or they would ask them to hand over their sons to fight with them. Many of the rich fled. The poor had no choice but to stay and survive the best they could. So many of our men had gone to the mines or to the Gulf to work, leaving their families fatherless. The sons were easy prey. The threats began to come closer to home. One day Ahmad Shah received a warning from unknown people that they would kill him, so for a while he left for Islamabad to try to raise awareness there of what was happening to our valley. One of the worst things about that period was when we started to doubt one another. Fingers were even pointed at my father. Our people are being killed, but this Ziauddin is so outspoken, and he's still alive. He must be a secret agent. Actually, he had been threatened too but hadn't told us. He had given a press conference in Peshawar demanding that the military act against the Taliban and go after their commanders. Afterwards, people told him his name was heard on Mullah FM in a threat from Shah Duran. My father brushed it off. But I was worried. He was outspoken and involved in so many groups and committees that he often wouldn't come home till midnight. He started to sleep at one of his friends' houses to protect us in case the Taliban came for him. He couldn't bear the thought of being killed in front of us. I could not sleep until he returned and I could lock the gate. When he was at home, my mother would place a ladder in the backyard up to the outside wall, so he could get down to the street below if he was in sudden danger. He laughed at the idea. Maybe Atal the squirrel could make it, but not me. My mother was always trying to think up plans for what she would do if the Taliban came. She thought of sleeping with a knife under her pillow. I said I could sneak into the toilet and call the police. My brothers and I thought of digging a tunnel. Once again I prayed for a magic wand to make the Taliban disappear. One day I saw my little brother Atal digging furiously in the garden. "What are you doing?" I asked him. "Making a grave," he said. Our news bulletins were full of killings and death, so it was natural for Atal to think of coffins and graves. Instead of hide and seek and cops and robbers, children were now playing army versus Taliban. They made rockets from branches and used sticks for Kalashnikovs. These were their sports of terror. There was no one to protect us. Our own deputy commissioner, Syed Javeed, was going to Taliban meetings, praying in their mosque and leading their meetings. He became a perfect Talib. One target of the Taliban were non-governmental organizations or NGOs, which they said were anti-Islam. When the NGOs received threatening letters from the Taliban and went to the DC to ask for his help, he wouldn't even listen to them. Once in a meeting, my father challenged him, "Whose orders are you representing? Fazlullah's or the government's? We say in Arabic, people follow their king. When the highest authority in your district joins the Taliban, then Talibanization becomes normal." We like conspiracy theories in Pakistan, and we had many. Some believed the authorities were deliberately encouraging the Taliban. They said the army wanted the Taliban in Swat because the Americans wanted to use an airbase there to launch their drones. With the Taliban in the valley, our government could say to the Americans, "We can't help you because we have our own problems." It was also a way to answer growing American criticism that our military was helping the Taliban rather than trying to stop them. Now our government could respond, "You say we are taking your money and aiding these terrorists, but if that's the case, why are they attacking us too?" The Taliban obviously have the support of unseen forces, said my father. But what's happening is not simple, and the more you want to understand, the more complex it becomes. That year, 2008, the government even released Sufi Muhammad, the founder of the TNSM, from prison. He was said to be more moderate than his son-in-law Fazlullah, and there was hope that he would make a peace deal with the government to impose Sharia law in Swat and release us from Taliban violence. My father was in favor of this. We knew this would not be the end, but my father argued that if we had Sharia, the Taliban would have nothing more to fight for. They should then put down their arms and live like ordinary men. If they did not, he said, this would expose them for what they really were. The army still had their guns trained on the mountains overlooking Mingora. We would lie in bed listening to them boom boom all night. They would stop for 5, 10 or 15 minutes and then start again the moment we drifted off to sleep. Sometimes we covered our ears or buried our heads under pillows, but the guns were close by and the noise was too loud to block out. Then the morning after, on TV, we would hear of more Taliban killings and wonder what the army was doing with all its booming cannons and why they could not even stop the daily broadcasts on Mullah FM. Both the army and the Taliban were powerful. Sometimes their roadblocks were less than a kilometer apart on the same main roads. They would stop us but seemed unaware of each other's presence. It was unbelievable. No one understood why we were not being defended. People would say they were two sides of the same coin. My father said we common people were like chaff caught between the two stones of a water mill. But he still wasn't afraid. He said we should continue to speak out. I am only human, and when I heard the guns my heart used to beat very fast. Sometimes I was very afraid but I said nothing, and it didn't mean I would stop going to school. But fear is very powerful, and in the end it was this fear that had made people turn against Shabana. Terror had made people cruel. The Taliban bulldozed both our Pashtun values and the values of Islam. I tried to distract myself by reading Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, which answered big questions such as how the universe began and whether time could run backwards. I was only 11 years old and already I wished it could. We Pashtuns know the stone of revenge never decays, and when you do something wrong you will face the music. But when would that be? We continually asked ourselves.